Good day, everyone. I am honored to have Ukraine's first Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Economy, Yulia Shchurenko, and Executive Vice President for the European Commission and Commissioner for Trade, Valdis Dombrovskis, with me here today. And we have just finished our lunch discussions where we discussed how to further strengthen the economic relationship between the European Union and Ukraine. And the discussion was very clear. The European Union and its member states are ready to support Ukraine as long as needed. And this is also true in the fields of trade. Ukraine is a highly valued trading partner and will become even more so as its economy recovers. And the efforts made by the European Union and Ukraine have led to results. In the face of the Russian aggression, EU-Ukrainian trade figures remained stable last year. Ukraine needs funds to keep its country going under the immense pressure that the Russian invasion has caused, and the European Union will be contributing with 18 billion euro in financial relief this year. But we also need to ensure that private enterprises have the right preconditions to contribute to the economic recovery and the reconstruction of Ukraine. Integrating Ukraine into the single market and trade are fundamental tools for creating prosperity. And last year, the EU suspended all customs and anti-dumping tariffs. Hopefully, the EU will make a decision to prolong these during the Swedish presidency. At today's meeting, we also discussed how we can revitalize EU's trade relations and strengthen the EU's global competitiveness. And there was a very broad agreement that pursuing an open, sustainable and rules-based trade agenda can make key contribution to strengthening the EU's competitiveness. And finalizing ongoing negotiations for free trade agreements and at the same time making sure agreements enter into force is of great importance, and we should also look further than the agreements currently on the table. Trade policy makes a very important contribution to the green and digital transition, and we have been discussing how trade rules can support the digital transformation and how the results of the Trade and Sustainable Development Review can be implemented to promote the entry into the force of free trade agreements. We have also been discussing the EU-US trade relations. A very strong European Union needs a very strong transatlantic link because they are mutually reinforcing. And strengthening the EU-US engagement on key economic and geostrategic issues and advancing a positive, forward-looking transatlantic trade agenda is an important priority for the Swedish presidency. And despite the challenges that the EU is facing, including from the Inflation Reduction Act, we must continue to build on our long-term relationship with the US and promote the open and rules-based world trade order. Now I will give the floor to Executive Vice President Dombrovskis to say a few remarks. Valdis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here in snowy Stockholm. The economic and strategic importance of EU trade agenda has never been clearer. So thank you, Minister Forsell, for reflecting this in today's ministerial. Let me start by saying that we are delighted to have Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister, Yulia Shchurenko, to be here with us. Our strategic goals to support Ukraine are unchanged. First, support Ukraine to win the war. Second, continue to apply economic and political pressure on Russia. And third, support Ukraine's reconstruction by deepening its integration into the EU single market and supporting its reform path towards EU membership. Trade plays a vital role. We have strongly supported Ukraine by suspending all duties on their imports into the EU. Now the Commission has proposed to renew a unilateral full trade liberalisation for another year until June 2024. And beyond this, we'll work on possible permanent and reciprocal trade liberalisation. This should help to provide legal certainty to attract much needed foreign investment and support Ukraine's reconstruction. In a wider sense, Russia's brutal aggression has acted as a wake-up call, and it has forced us to look clearly at our dependencies and the value of working more closely with reliable partners. So I'm glad to see real convergence in today's talks about how we should pursue open and dynamic trade agenda to boost our competitiveness. First, we need to use our trade agreements and expand our network to ensure diversified, secure and reliable supply of key inputs, including critical raw materials, which is important also in the context of digital and green transition. Second, we must generate new export opportunities in the industries of the future, building on our competitive advantage as the world's biggest trader is the best way to do so. And remember, 90% of the global growth will take place outside the EU over the next 5 years. So we need to be connected to this global growth. So, keeping all this in mind, our focus should be on widening our network of trade agreements with a strong focus on sustainability. And we have a real window of opportunity to make headway. We have sent a New Zealand deal to the Council for ratification, and will finalize our agreement with Chile soon. We aim to conclude negotiations with Australia by middle of the year. We want to advance discussions with Mercosur and make progress with agreements with India and Indonesia. And we are casting a net wider than traditional free trade deals, including trade and technology councils, critical raw material partnerships, digital trade agreements. Finally, we must continue working to support rules-based foundations of international trade. That's why we'll continue to lead global efforts for strong and reformed World Trade Organization. On a related note, I'm pleased that Japan has today decided to join the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement. The MPI is an alternative system for resolving WTO disputes set up by the EU and key partners in the absence of functioning appellate body. So this shows that our partners are committed to a functioning rules-based system. Let me turn now to transatlantic relations. The first thing to say is that our cooperation on Ukraine remains rock solid. In parallel, there are discussions taking place about how to green our economies, and trade policy is a big part of this discussion. From the EU perspective, we should be doing everything to make our respective green transformations converge rather than diverge. And we remain convinced that the most efficient step is to build a genuine transatlantic marketplace for green goods and services. I have made this point to the members of Biden administration, including in recent days with Treasury Secretary Yellen and U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Tai. At the last Trade and Technology Council meeting, we launched the Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade, and we want this initiative to feature prominently on the next TTC meeting to be held here in Sweden. And as you are aware, we are in intensive contacts with the US about certain aspects of Inflation Reduction Act. Well, our joint task force has already delivered results, notably with important understanding on commercial electrical vehicles. But clearly, we need to see more. This is why we are seeking FTA-like treatments that we hope to achieve through building resilient supply chains on critical raw materials. And with my counterpart, Ambassador Tai, we are working on new framework in a steel and aluminium sector, the global steel and aluminium arrangement. I will stop here because these topics will be discussed later today between President von der Leyen and President Biden, so we can expect new announcements today. And once again, I'd like to thank Swedish Presidency for an excellent meeting, and with this also pass floor to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Svyrydenko, please.
Thank you for this meeting. I think it was excellent, and it's very good that it was a very practical one for us. And the obvious way how to support Ukraine is, of course, to continuous autonomous trade measures. It's something that was discussed during this meeting. But as well, yesterday Russia once again shelled whole territory of Ukraine with thousands of missiles, and this time it's used most expensive and advanced missiles, Kinzhal. So what Ukraine needs most right now, it's weapons and sanctions. And Russia still has technical capacity to produce missiles using equipment from different countries, and a lot of them are delivered through neutral countries. So it's hard time to impose more severe mechanism of restriction of export. It's something that also was mentioned during our meeting. So the autonomous trade measures and solidarity lane introduced by EU last year saved Ukrainian economy in the darkest time of a sea blockade. And the solidarity lanes are already turned into the new trade routes. And bearing in mind the candidacy of Ukraine to the accession to the EU, this trade route are internal one. And one very important topic that was discussed, of course, it's reconstruction and recovery, and such mechanism like insurance. And we cannot wait until the war will be finished. And we need to speed up time, otherwise Ukrainian economy will dry up. So the response, we see the active use of war risk insurance mechanism. War or political risk insurance is the instrument that was used by all of your countries several decades ago, and it was put on shelf thanks to the peaceful time, but now it's time to use it again and to be able to start the reconstruction during the early stage, even this year.
Okay, so with that, we are ready for a couple of questions. Remember to state your name, your media organization, and to whom you are directing the question. First question here, Swedish News Agency, TT.
Yes, question for Mr. Dombrovskis and Johan Forsell about the agreement about duties with Ukraine. Will there be a prolongation, you think? Is there opposition among member states against prolonging the agreement?
Yeah, well, as I was mentioning, so already last month the Commission has proposed to renew this autonomous trade measures, this unilateral trade liberalization from our side for another year until June 2024. And also today's discussion showed a broad support for this measure. At the same time, there are certain concerns raised about some sensitive agricultural sectors where we see strong increases of imports from Ukraine, like poultry and eggs. And correspondingly, we have proposed to have a strong safeguard provision in our autonomous trade measures, which would allow us to react swiftly if we would see some risks for distortion of the EU market.
Well, from my perspective, I believe the short answer is yes. I believe the Swedish presidency believed that there will be a prolongation, and this is very important because, as I said, the day before yesterday, we welcomed the ministers of defense here to Stockholm. We were discussing on how to provide EU with ammunition, which is needed to defend their country. Yesterday, I welcomed the Minister for International Development Cooperation regarding the humanitarian assistance, and the scope and aim for this meeting is about how to use trade as a more powerful tool in the reconstruction efforts of Ukraine. And in order to do so, of course, having the prolongation of the suspension of the tariffs is essential. And from our perspective, we have been very positive in having such a prolongation for at least 12 months, I would say. And this is not only about economic aspects of it. Of course, these are essential, but there is also another questions regarding the EU accession plans when it comes to the membership question for Ukraine, and this is also in line with that. So I hope that there will be a decision. I believe that there will be such a one for at least 12 months.
Thank you. Next question here. Fourth row.
Philip Blenkinsop of Reuters. A question about the Mercosur agreement, specifically to Vice President. How close are you to presenting, I think it's called a sustainability instrument, to EU members and lawmakers? And when would you imagine this being put to Mercosur partners? And then both to you and Minister Forsell, clearly you are Mercosur agreement enthusiasts. There are certain other countries who are, I guess you could call them more hesitant. Is there any kind of sense you get that this hesitancy among those a bit more reluctant has eased?
Yeah, so as regards Mercosur agreement, well, indeed, so what we think it's important for being able to move forward with the agreement is to have this additional sustainability instrument. We are already consulting member states and European Parliament on this, and we are already having preliminary consultations with Mercosur countries as well. So this work is advancing. Indeed, we think there is a window of opportunity, and we see the next EU Latin America summit in July this year as an important reference point by which we should have decisive progress on this.
Well, I'm proud to be an enthusiast when it comes to free trade agreements. And as you know, we are hoping to sign with New Zealand during the end of the Swedish presidency. Even though New Zealand is a great country, and I believe such an FTA would also be a big step forward. As you know, the last FTA was signed a couple of years ago, and one of the aims for the Swedish presidency is to revitalize the competitiveness agenda and put focus on the new FTAs. And even though New Zealand it would be a big step forward, of course, Mercosur would be something completely different because it's so much bigger. I would love, of course, to sign such an FTA during the Swedish presidency. Might perhaps be a bit too optimistic, but perhaps we could at least conclude it in the coming months, perhaps not during the presidency, but in a couple of months' time. We are doing what we can to give such a push forward. I believe from the discussions that we have had so far during the meeting here in Stockholm, I think there is a genuine support among the member states for moving in this direction. Of course, such an FTA, I mean, is a very big thing. Of course, there are also concerns and there are details and technical aspects of it. But still, I believe that we are moving in the right direction, and being very enthusiastic about it, you can at least count on the Swedish presidency, as I said, to do our best to give it a big push forward. Then one should also underline that even though Mercosur is a very big thing, we are also aiming at having other FTAs. I think one should also mention in this circumstances here also Australia. We are negotiating with Australia. India, we have been negotiating for many years, but perhaps there is now some kind of window of opportunity. They're also sharing the G20 presidency, and Indonesia also. So there are many possible FTAs out there, and as I said, this is one of the most important priorities, perhaps the most important one, together with security during the Swedish presidency. Thank you.
So next question there.
Hi, I'm Malin from Dagens Industri. Can you say something about how the discussions went in there about this idea of having an EU-led export control for equipment to manufacture semiconductors?
The Dutch minister indeed presented the decision of the Dutch government, but there was no discussion on this point during today's trade ministerial meeting. As you know, this was not the topic which was on today's agenda.
Yes, and from our perspective, we of course, we welcome the cooperation, but also the dialogue on export control based on the EU and also the international framework. And in case of having national export control measures, the EU member states maintain already today an information exchanged, including with the EU Commission. But I think this is one of the questions that we will continue to discuss over the next coming meetings.
Any other questions? Here, Jan Andersson.
Thank you, Jan Andersson, Swedish Radio. Commissioner, what was the reaction within this meeting according to IRA? What did you say? Thank you.
Indeed, one of the topics on today's agenda was EU-US relation, where I would say there is a broad acknowledgement of the importance of the strategic partnership between EU and US, especially in current geopolitical context. So there's lots of willingness to advance our work together across different work streams, including in the area of trade through the Trade and Technology Council, and also looking specifically on the green transformation, so to work on transatlantic initiative on sustainable trade. But at the same time, obviously, there are concerns related to U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, so this was featuring also in today's discussions, and I think an important element is that the EU and member states are talking in a same voice when we are discussing with our various US counterparts. And I would say there was a broad understanding on this and willingness to continue close cooperation and unified response. So we continue to make progress on addressing certain issues. Already mentioned the solution regarding the electrical vehicles tax credits with a broad interpretation of commercial vehicles provisions. So we hope to make progress on raw materials with achieving the FTA equivalent treatment of the EU. As I said, we can expect some further announcements on this following the President Biden and President von der Leyen meeting today. So we will continue to work on this, and we'll continue to coordinate our approaches very closely.
And if I may just add to that, we stand, of course, fully behind the Commission and its strategic leadership and Valdis leadership on this issue. I will be going to Washington in a few weeks' time to meet with Ambassador Tai, but also Minister Raimondo. From our perspective, I think it's important to underline that much of the discussion regarding IRA has to do with stated legislation. But there are also other aspects to what the Commission has proposed and that are important for us as presidency. We have already been discussing the free trade agenda. That is, I would like to underline the importance of that, but also aspects of strengthening the single market, which is also another aspect of what the Commission has put on the table. And listening in the discussions today and before, I would say there is a strong support for also addressing these aspects in order to make the European Union more competitive in the future.
We'll take one final question. All the way in the back, please.
Thank you very much. Jorge Valero with Bloomberg. Since we have the Ukrainian minister here, a question for Vice President Dombrovskis as well, for both of you. Do you think that the allies, in particular the EU and the US, should provide some clarity when it comes to the macro-financial assistance for Ukraine for 2024 onwards as soon as possible, and make some specific concrete progress already in the spring meetings, the IMF spring meetings in Washington in next month?
As regards our financial assistance to Ukraine, and including specifically the macro-financial assistance program, well, that was one of the asks of Ukrainian authorities for this year's financial support to ensure stable and predictable financing flow, which was less the case last year because many decisions were taken on ad hoc basis. So for this year, we are providing our 18 billion euros macro-financial assistance program. We have disbursed 3 billion euros already in January and aiming for a monthly disbursements of 1.5 billion euros as of this month. And the assessment for this year is that the financing gap for Ukraine is covered. Of course, we know there is a very high uncertainty, and also there is a possibility for the EU's macro-financial assistance program to increase the amounts should this prove necessary. But clearly we'll be discussing, as you mentioned, also in the IMF World Bank meetings next months, what are the next steps, what do we do beyond 2023. Well, I would say in a current context of very high uncertainty, it's difficult to say where the focus will be. Will we be able to already more focus on the reconstruction, or the focus is still going to be on covering the daily needs? But it's clear that we will continue this work, and we intend to engage with our international partners, with US, other G7 countries, with international financial institutions, to ensure that there is a stable financial support for Ukraine for as long as it's needed as an emergency support, and a smooth transitioning towards reconstruction phase.
Thank you. That will conclude this press conference. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead.
Okay, so yes, so last year we received 32 billion of macro financial support from our partner side. This year we have around $5 billion deficit per month. So we have a commitment that Valdis just mentioned about from EU side, around 18 billion this year, and we have commitment. We have commitment from US side, of course, and hope that starting from April we are going to have the full pledge IMF program. So it's something that we are working on, and of course. This year we also would like to focus on the reconstruction issue, and just to look deeply on the tools that we can provide together with the EU side to facilitate companies to participate in reconstruction and recovery.
Okay, so that will conclude the press conference. Thank you, ministers. Thank you, vice presidents. Thank you for the interpretation, and thank you everyone for coming. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.